Having previously played boomer shooters developed by this company, I came in with preconceived notions. I expected it to more or less be more of the same, but within a fantasy setting. I thought the game would be slow, level by level, and at times straight up frustrating to deal with. Surprisingly, I was wrong. It didn't take long for me to realize that though there are many similarities between Witch Rise and Gastroforce, Witch Rise is the superior game. Right from the start I could tell that WR's controls weren't as stiff as in GF. I could freely move around without feeling as if my character was incapable of bending their knees. Seeing as how the sword is the first weapon that's available to you, being able to use it helps showcase this. The sword attack is very responsive and I like that. It feels weird when there's a delay between pressing a button and the game responding. Not only does it feel weird, it could lead to you dying or taking damage when that could have been prevented with more responsive controls. It really didn't take long for WR to show me what it had to offer. Within a few minutes, I noticed that it was possible to level up quickly. You could eventually grind to level up, but within the first hour or so, that really wasn't necessary. All I did was play with the intention of advancing through the game, and the result of that was being pleasantly surprised. What I most noticed was how my HP and MP increased. At first, that wasn't helpful, seeing as how I was limited to the sword, but I still enjoyed knowing that progress was being made. Despite having enjoyed the time I spent with WR, I did have issues with it. WR isn't a boomer shooter. It's a retro-styled FPS game that's more like Hexen. As a result of that, I was able to explore through all of the map and its areas at once. There were certain things I needed to accomplish and unlock before the entire map was explorable, but I was fine with what was initially offered. What bugged me was how there wasn't an indicator or something similar on the minimap. Even with a map, compass, and directions, navigating was still a struggle. It also didn't help that enemy attacks could disorient you. I'm responsible for this having occurred, but the screen shake didn't do me any favors. It's possible to turn it off, but I left it on because it was part of the default settings. As a result of enemy attacks and the screen shaking, I'd end up feeling lost. It's kind of like when you're playing pin the tail on the donkey and someone spins you around 3 times. You previously had an idea of where things were, so you try to move based on that, but due to having been shaken up, you're left struggling. It's not a surprise at all, seeing as how the Nintendo Switch is nearly a decade old, but it's still surprising that I experienced FPS drops in WR. It might have to do with the game engine's limitations rather than with the Switch, but there was one obstacle in particular that practically brought the game to a standstill. It was a lava obstacle that shot out rocks. The obstacle made gameplay more interesting, but I didn't like experiencing FPS drops. Thankfully, that was pretty much the only area where that happened. Even in rooms with a decent number of enemies, that wasn't a problem. On the topic of enemies, I liked that there was a variety of them. There were a few that had the same design except for different colors, but that didn't bother me. There was enough variety that I felt satisfied with what WR offered in that department. WR isn't a typical boomer shooter, but there were enough nods to Doom and other similar games. Early on, you encounter enemies that are pretty much cacodemons. The main difference is their color and that they're friendlier looking. I also like that there were secret areas. Sometimes WR lets you know that there was a secret close by, but other times I'd stumble into them thanks to damaging a wall and being lucky. The majority of the time, the secret rooms offered coins or recovery items. Having been able to find temporary buffs would have been nice, but I'm sure that wasn't included for a specific reason. Besides the secret rooms, I enjoyed the occasional destructible objects I'd find. They added to the gameplay, offered you more options to work with, and the truth is that they made certain enemy encounters easier to deal with. If I was low on HP or MP, I could focus what I had on TNT boxes. The result would be an explosion that would at the very least push enemies away or instant kill them. I wouldn't go so far as to say that this is good or bad, but WR was shorter than I expected. I assumed it would be more like GF, but I ended up beating WR after 2 play sessions. It's possible that the game would come off as longer on higher difficulties, but I didn't give that a try. After a certain point in WR, you more or less just mow down all enemies, even the bosses. By the point that I encountered the rest of WR's bosses, I was so well prepared that I didn't really get to fully take in what they had to offer. What stood out to me was how small the boss rooms were. This wasn't an issue with the first boss, seeing as how I didn't have the ability to dash, but once I unlocked it, that's when I became a bit frustrated. On the bright side, it wasn't bad enough to the point where I wasn't able to work around this. I'm repeating myself, but it was strange to me that the bosses inadvertently ended up brushed aside. You could say that showcases WR's flaws in more ways than one, but it is what it is. Witch Rise ended up being more than I expected it would be. I thought it would end up being a reskinned version of Gastroforce, but that wasn't the case at all. It seems like the developers of this game improved upon GF's flaws and ended up with a more enjoyable experience. Witch Rise has its flaws, mainly with navigating around the map, but it offers enough to where some will not only enjoy it, they'll be left wanting to play more. We're at a point in time where everyone and their mother is working on a boomer shooter styled game, so when something that deviates from the path most traveled is released, it's a breath of fresh air. If you've been gaming since the late 80s or early 90s, this is more of what you've most likely experienced. But even if it does what other games did before it, it's still worth playing. How do you feel about short games? Have there been any games that exceeded your expectations? How do you feel about melee attacks in retro-styled FPS games? If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, share, and if you're up for it, become a patron. Thank you very much for watching.